Yo. What's up, everybody?
Yo.
Welcome.
Hi, guys. Hi, Internet.
Hi, TV. How is
Hi.
you guys?
What's it like out there in TV land? Or actually, we're in TV land right now. Hello out there from TV land. It's a beautiful place to be. That's from Nick at Night.
Let me see if I can get this problem, this chronic crisis of my issue solved. All right, before we dive in with episode 2 of the provisionally titled Self-Legitimating Johnson's podcast here at Theory Underground, I do want to say, on the listening side, if the levels are out of whack, please let us know. And then if we don't change it, within a minute, remind us. And then if we don't change it within 5 minutes, remind us ad infinitum until we correct it, because the chances are they're off. And Mike H just said, good levels for me. And Mike, I want you to know your opinion doesn't matter because you are in the Zoom call. You are in the Zoom call. I am specifically, and I have to drive this home. I have to really emphasize it because it's very deceptive. If you're in the Zoom call, everything sounds great because Zoom is doing a lot of correcting, which means that people who are on the live side might hear something different because what they hear is what I hear from the Zoom call, which is Zoom corrected. But then they also hear me, which is not from the Zoom call, but is direct from my microphone, potentially mediated by some plugins. The point is that the Zoom will make Nance sound good, but if I sound way too loud compared to Nance, you guys won't know about sometimes. Yeah, and you guys won't know about it
through OBS.
Yeah, thank you. So
that does happen sometimes. And I did recently make some changes over here to my setup, so my levels are actually lower than they have been previously. So I might be lower. So, but it looks like the chat is saying sounds good. So.
They are saying that.
Good to know. Yeah.
They are saying that.
Yeah. Thanks,
and
chat.
that's good news. Yeah. Thanks, folks on the YouTube side. All right. Nance, let's do a quick little reflection on episode 1, sides A and B, and where we are now. Anything you want to say off the cuff before I jump into my little itinerary?
Yeah, I think I didn't expect what happened last week with the A side and the B side. It was a pleasant surprise. I think we were in stellar form, and it was great. And we might be premiering side A and side B here in the next couple of days via just streaming it. So it's up, so we don't have to. We'll figure that out. So if anyone's waiting on tenterhooks for it, it'll be out in the next week probably. But it was great. I love it. I'm happy with it. It was fucking fantastic. And I knew it was going to be good going into reading Bourdieu, but I didn't know that the kind of emergent conversation on the back end of it would be as good as it was. And I didn't know that you and I both would be kind of, sinking threes.
Yeah, and it sounds a little self-congratulatory, like we're sitting here running victory laps on our episode 1. Sure, I get it, but the name of this podcast is Self-Legitimating Assholes. So there you fucking go. Deal with it. Pew, 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 pew. The point, I think that this is one of those sort of emergent realizations that crystallized for us, is that this meta-discourse that we have and that we have been doing is a process of self-legitimation within the context of a society, which is to say social system, that is heavily stratified and antagonistic towards people who do not participate in these language games or in these or trying to navigate these fields for symbolic capital, right? And at the same time, for those who are interested in just doing the thing for its own sake, that would be like Autodidacts, very repulsive, because if you're doing it for its own sake, you're going to find yourself surrounded by people who feel like, we'll just use the punk term, posers, right? They seem like posers. And why do they seem like posers? It's because they're in the game for that symbolic capital. But the thing is that is not the same thing as doing it for its own sake. Doing it for its own sake versus doing it for symbolic capital are two very different things. From the standpoint of Pierre Bourdieu, who we'll be reading him in a moment here, there might not be a distinction between doing it for symbolic capital and doing it for its own sake. Now, I think, and this is a McCarricker assumption you can operate under, but take it with a grain of salt, that for Bourdieu, he's not going to sit here and wonder when in history did it become the case that generally and for the most part, the people caught up in these games for symbolic capital stopped doing it for the real reasons and started doing it for symbolic capital, right? He's not going to sit there and play that game because he's probably going to try to avoid any of the language games that come with this, like, oh, there's an original, authentic way of doing this thing, right? So his avoidance of that problem can be interpreted as the transhistoricization of symbolic capital onto all previous times in history. That's a really important distinction, though. There's a big distinction between him not wanting to transhistoricize because he wants to just keep it focused on what's going on at his time, and some kind of attempt to transhistoricize for other reasons. So like there's different motivations that could factor into it. And I think that the tendency, if you want to dismiss Bourdieu in the most easy way possible, is just to say, oh, well, he just doesn't think that anyone does art for its own sake. Wash your hands of him. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that, and this is, I've seen it. I've seen this with professors. I've seen this with artists. People get offended because he thinks that their real motivation, their realist, most base motivation for doing the thing that they say that they love and they pursue for its own sake is in fact the symbolic capital that comes with it, the prestige that is, I want to say, awarded to a person who, I don't want to say awarded, the prestige that eventually a person who's been awarded a lot of symbolic capital gets via processes of institutional recognition, right? So I am separating prestige from institutional recognition, and that is to say that prestige is an effect of getting institutional recognition. And then what is that recognition of? Well, you've done something that means that you get some kind of bestowal on the part of the institution. The institution says, yes. And insofar as that institution has a monopoly on a certain kind of symbolic capital, that is why people enter that field to fight over the slim possibilities of actually getting that recognition in the first place. Okay, so we find ourselves here on the internet, in between academia and the attention economy, and we're wondering, how do we have a voice, and how do we find our voice, and how do we have our voice once we start to speak not get simply written off as, oh, that's your opinion, man, right? And that's why self-legitimating discourses are necessary. And when I came into this Zoom call, I overheard just the tail end of something that you guys are all talking about here on the back end. There's some TU membership people in the back. TU membership people, TU members in the back. And Nance was the membership people from now on.
Membership people. Yeah, of course.
From now on, we don't say members. We say membership people.
Membership people.
Nance was talking about, well, I don't remember. I just kind of reduced it to the prediction discourse. And I wanted to reduce the prediction discourse itself to a self-legitimating mechanism that everyone who wants to be an intellectual seems to have to participate in. And I'll just give you all the short version. Start looking for when a person tries to tell you that you should listen to them because they made a prediction that became true. Okay? Because think about it. If for the last 2,500 years, the only way that you can really study the things that you want to study and do it for its own sake is also having aristocrats go, oh, okay, I should fund you. Then it becomes important that something that you do is something that they cannot do. And guess what? Nobody can do. Predict the future. And so what all of this time that we spend doing philosophy, part of how it can be legitimated and, that we can get funding or jobs, as an advisor to the king, for example, is by being like, oh yeah, I called that, right? So then they're going to be like, oh, I want to pay attention to your predictions. And I'll use one example that keeps coming up on my Substack. Every time I'm finished listening to one of Nance's Negativity Hour episodes, it autoplays this one guy. And
is it the guy you sent me?
Yes.
No, that means they're lumping me together with him.
Yeah, dude,
no, dude.
He plays for me I was just washing dishes again today. I mean, I've washed dishes multiple times when this guy comes on. And so I'm standing there like washing dishes. My hands are wet. I can't just stop and go over and skip. And so I'm listening to the whole thing. And it's almost it's almost worth saving, clipping, transcribing, analyzing as a group, and using as a perfect specimen of this sort of discursive mechanism that we're talking about.
Dude, he's like, I was right all along. You can go back and look at 2003. I wrote a blog post that said X, Y, and Z was going to happen. But with him, it's like, yeah, of course. Like, that wasn't a prediction or a projection. Was.
The prediction was that podcasts would be the next big thing.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. It's like, oh, you're just paying attention. You're just paying attention.
And he's like, everybody else was like, that is not going to be a thing. People called us crazy. People were like, that is not going to. And I'm just like, dude, who are you talking to? Who was telling you that podcasts would not be the next big thing? And then I remember, no, it's true. It's literally his grandparents. But then I remember, here's the facts. If you stopped me on the street 2 to 3 years ago, chances are if you had asked me, okay, so the stuff that you study, what's the real point of it? What does it help you see that a person who doesn't study the stuff you study wouldn't be able to see? Well, I would have gone into this whole thing about, oh, well, you see, like because I'm into theory and philosophy, I was able to see that all of this sort of excitement around social media was going to reach a point where it became frustration with social media. I was at conferences talking about how this is necessarily going to lead to all kinds of problems, and that people are going to realize that these interactions they're having are a slim, sad shadow of the kinds of interactions that they would have been having if they were doing it IRL, right? Like I would have said something like that, and the fact is it's true. I was saying that kind of thing at conferences, and at the time, whether they were peers or boomers, they would come to me afterwards and say, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And well, did you ever think of that? And the point was everybody's knee-jerk thing at the time was to say, oh no, actually the internet's just great. And to take any sort of hesitation as a wholesale rejection, which it never was on my part. Okay, well, you could have got me to say that on the street. I could have tried to sell that to you as some kind of justification for what it is that I'm doing. But here's the truth. I would have wanted to study these things anyway. And that prediction was not unique. There were millions of people like me thinking it every day already, right? This is not unique. It's not special. But if I want to work on my cover letter or my CV for some kind of I don't know, like a a tenure committee or like an acceptance committee or any kind of committee that reads cover letters, yeah, I would really want to overplay my ability to predict the way that things were going to go. And so, this is one of the big kinds of self-legitimating discourses, I think, that has become very normal for us all. And in the sense that your conscious motivations don't matter. What matters is realizing that there are objective motivations and then we rationalize those. I think it's important to keep in mind the ways that making predictions about the future are themselves something that are being incentivized. We're being incentivized to do that because we're being incentivized to be hope salesmen or to help people who speculate on the future to want to fund us. Either or, both and. Yeah.
Yeah, both and, absolutely.
Yeah, guys.
I like this, man, and
this
like
man?
well before this man, the only one I can see on my screen right now, and it's you, Dave.
Yay.
No, like before we went live, we checked in, and I was like, yeah, this goes well with this kind of like attempt at self-critique that I always find myself in, like where I always find myself asking, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What's the point? But I don't think it has to go so far as to what's the point. Like, I think there is a healthy way to ask, what am I doing and why am I doing it? Without taking it to that like debased, like just totally unsure of self. No, it does matter that we are aware of the kind of meta-discourse in our situation, in our context, so we don't find ourselves chasing the algorithm. Like, that's part of it too. Like, we are in the algorithm. We have no choice but to use these tools. But by staying aware of our situation and our context and the kind of meta around it, that can help us resist the tendencies and kind of like resist being pulled by the undertow, and becoming just more people out here in TV land saying things for the sake of saying them rather than saying things for the sake of pushing the field forward so we can actually have a better grip on our situation in the future, so we can be more efficacious. But I'm also aware that now I'm starting to rationalize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%, dude. And
yeah,
it's when people think of the way that Derrida worked himself into knots and then couldn't do anything but kind of play off of words at the end of the day, that kind of performance comes from a neurotic whose theory has become self-aware about its need to be reflexive, and then that reflexivity at some point becomes just absolutely frustrating for anybody who's not invested in that game, and it takes a lot of very unique priors to become invested in that game, right? And so the elusio is elusive in that sense. But really quick, I want to say the reason I didn't name the guy whose episode keeps coming on whenever I'm auto playing stuff on Substack, the guy who predicted that podcasts would be popular or the next big thing. The reason I'm not naming him is because I think he's probably just like a well-meaning guy. I don't want to.
I think he's a sweet guy. Yeah, he's a
shit on him.
He's just he's doing his best.
He's doing his best, but the main reason, let's be honest, is because I think he probably listens to some of our stuff now, and so it's like, well, I'm not trying to like say anything special here. To the guy. I hope that what you picked up from everything I just said is we all do this. And
yes,
it's the fact that your episode keeps coming on that I'm thinking of it instead of something else. But when I say that it's a specimen, I mean, yes, it really is like it is that move concretized into the most succinct little demonstration of it. But really to and this is where it would get humiliating if people knew his name. Guys, look, it's not just that he said, "Oh, look, I predicted podcasts, therefore, and then insinuating that you should take him seriously because he predicted that they would be a big deal." No, he doesn't insinuate it. He says it. And that's what makes it special. Because most academics, especially academics entering the attention economy, they imply it, but they would never fucking say it. Because if you say it...
Yeah, you have to perform a disavowal. You have to be the humility as opposed to hubris. But but there's a special performative type of like, it's like being coy. It's almost like being coquettish, but in this male way of like, yes, I am an expert, but I'm not going to tell you I'm an expert. I'm going to show you I'm an expert. But they're doing all that to kind of cover up the lack of expertise. And it becomes this weird movement to disavowal. And no, just say it with your chest, dude. Like how we started off by congratulating ourselves. Just fucking stand up and say it and keep it moving. Like, I think the shit we do is dope. I do. I think we drop bangers left and right. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We bring the fucking heat. And that's not all the time. Like, sometimes we miss, foul ball every once in a while. But I think our shit's dope.
Never. Never. Fake news.
Never.
He's just making things up. Sometimes my microphone's too loud. Okay, that's what he meant. But it's never the content. I just wanted to finish by saying that he literally says that people should listen to people who were right about everything. And then he uses this one example of one thing that he was right about. But he doesn't ever add to it, like, he doesn't ever complexify it at all, right? Obviously, how to do that would mean you say, well, when it comes to simple, very broad, general predictions, like something's going to be the next big thing or not, there's two ways that can go. Either it does or it doesn't.
It is or it isn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Or some mysterious mixture between the two.
Yeah.
And so much of intellectual discourse on the attention economy is being like, I said it would be A, and it was A. That's the content. Or I said it would be A, but then this other thing happened, so now it's B, but here, let me explain. Or
this is why.
Yeah. Or here's the why between those two things was the case all along. Point is,
it's like those doomsday preachers who predict the end of the world, but they're never right about it, but they always have a justification for why. No, trust me, guys. This time I'm right about what I'm saying.
Yeah. And every so often, history will make some motherfucker like that correct. And then that motherfucker will start some kind of attempt at a new nation state, because he'll be like, I was right. I called it, guys. Or he'll surround himself with people who made good predictions, or at least can, cherry pick the times that they've made good predictions, and put them on his council,
Yeah. But of course, in this case, they are missing that kind of like cosmic truth that just like by sheer weight of numbers, obviously you're going to be right sometimes, but that doesn't mean you're right.
Yeah. And you can also be right, but for the wrong reasons. Right?
Yeah, dude.
There's just so many problems. And then the other thing is, just because you're right about one thing, and this was the bigger factor, just because you're right about one thing doesn't mean you're right about other things. Right?
Yeah.
So this idea that because we should start listening to the people who've been right about everything. Oh, you were right about one thing, so therefore we should start listening to you about everything else.
Necessarily right about all this other stuff. But that tends to be the case. That is the way legitimation has worked in the world we live in today, with scientism and with the popular mainline discourse that's going on, you can be ejected. You can be barred from public life for not adhering to the experts.
Right.
Or, so it's silly. Guy podcaster, you're silly, but you're not especially uniquely silly. The world we live in is silly, and at least you're a sweetheart, whereas the institutions are cold, inhuman, machinic abattoirs. So I'd rather hang out with that guy.
Maybe. I should also add that person does theory fiction, and so this all could be a deep, ironic troll. Like, that is possible. But to me, I think that's a little too deep. But we'll see. All right, folks. Last time we read from lecture 1 of Pierre Bourdieu's General Sociology lectures at the Collège de France from 1981 through 1982, and we started with the lecture from the 28th of April, 1982. If there are lectures in this series that genuinely start in 1981, please send them my way if you can get your hands on them. I have not been able to, and so I might have in the previous episode overhyped the beginning of this because, but also it certainly seems like a beginning because if you read the beginning, he's talking about setting up the whole course, right? So I'm just a little confused on why the subtitle of this book says 1981, 1982, considering the fact that this starts in April. Maybe in Paris they have a special calendar.
Or like he wrote the material in 81 and then presented it in 82, maybe?
Could be that.
I mean, because the work and the research was being done in the 1970s.
Oh yeah, so that would be. It's like, okay, well, in Derrida's sense of arche writing,
it
started.
I wrote that shit in
ago.
1962, homie.
Yeah, in Derrida's arche writing terms, my best book is already written. I just haven't.
That's the thing,
I haven't typed it out yet. Yeah.
If anyone ever asked me how's your writing coming along? How's your work coming along? Oh, I'm doing tons of writing. I get it done all day long, every day. It's just this arcade writing.
yeah. Exactly. So what we're turning to is lecture from May 5th, 1982. Before we get into it, I'll just recap the headers he gave us for the entirety of the course. We're going to get into field versus material field and how it is the between those things where you have the site of conflict. Field and habitus having to do with the motivation, action, and practices of people who have some kind of a self-conscious awareness of how they navigate a field, even if they don't know what a field is, and even if the way that they've internalized its motivations has a completely different rationalization in their own heads. It doesn't matter. And then finally, fields versus capital and the kinds of capital that there are. Now, I also want to point out that May 5th is Karl Marx's birthday. I doubt that, I think that that's correct. Maybe it's March 5th.
It is. It's
is
May
it March 5th?
Cinco de Mayo. Yeah, it's also, it's Cinco de Mayo and Marx's birthday.
Yeah. And Bourdieu, though he says he's influenced by Marx, manages to go this entire lecture without ever saying happy birthday, dear Marx. And he never even shouts out Mexican people for making the best food in the world, which is, to me, racist. So I think we should just close it out right there.
If September 16th is actually like the proper Mexican holiday. Cinco de Mayo is like Hallmark Mexican holiday. So like, it's like LA, Phoenix Mexican, not real Mexican.
As our token Chicano, you should be more in favor of the Hallmark version.
Well, this is true. This is
how
true.
White you are.
Yeah. But no, look, there is this. Chicano is distinct from Mexican, and Chicano is Mexican American, right? Like Chicano is this category or grouping that arose in Los Angeles, essentially, and they are Mexican Americans. So yeah, Cinco de Mayo is important, but it's more of a American thing than it is of a properly Mexican thing.
And April 16th is the real one.
September.
Oh, September 16th. Okay, well, good to know. Good to know. Okay, this is where somebody should timestamp down below that we're actually getting into it now. And then I will say to the people who are just popping in at the point that it's timestamped that what we said in the preamble was a lot of stuff about self-legitimation and about how prediction becomes incumbent upon intellectuals. Intellectuals are supposed to predict trends. And then that's because I'm just saying that that's the only way that we get funding is if people think that we're good at predicting trends. Of course, once it doesn't go the way you called it, if that ever happens, which it will, as long as you can figure out how to rationalize like how you were wrong and now you're going to be right, then everyone will keep going with you, just like they did with Nate Silver after his abysmal predictions related to Hillary Clinton's campaign, And yeah, we used a little example of that. We don't have to get into on this side, but we're going to start reading. And then I'll, at some point later in this, bring it back to the article that I posted today. Are autodidacts just pseudo-professionals? And all of this relates in that post. Everything I write in that post relates to what we'll be talking about today. But I'll give you all a little time with Bourdieu and his voice before I bring it back to my post that engages with Benjamin Studebaker's book, The Way is Shut, and the TU membership people.
Membership people, yep.
Reading of it yesterday.
Autonomously organized a reading group that was excellent. I was there for the first one and the one yesterday, and it was great. Sean and Kier and everyone else involved, you guys did great. Thank you for doing that.
The active institution, the insult as magical behavior, coding individuals, dividing reality, the example of socio-occupational categories. I'll read the first short section before handing it over to Nance. He goes, in his argument, Nicholas Rouet indicated that Milner's distinction between qualifying nouns and common nouns implied basically ignoring what semantics could contribute to the problem. And contradicting Milner, he points out that the distinction between non-classifiers and classifiers, like teacher or gendarme, is based on extreme cases. Thus, Rouet reproaches Milner with choosing the extreme poles of a continuum whose extremities run from teacher and gendarme, that is, professional names, at one end, to obvious insults like idiot or bastard, right? So that brings it back to what he was talking about last time. We were talking about, an insult where it's just your opinion versus where it's an actual category and it actually has institutional force behind it, as in the case where idiot is just an opinion if it's you in the comment section, but it means something else if it's coming from a teacher or from a psychiatrist. And of course, these lose their institutional cachet pretty quickly, and then they have to come up with new ways of saying the same old thing. And so that's why the DSM-5 keeps getting longer and longer and longer, because they have to find more elaborate ways of saying that you're a retard.
Dude, the tailorization of mental health or mental unhealth.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. They're like, how many names can we come up with for David McCarricker? DSM-5.
You got to get the Nance DLC too.
Yeah, exactly. Milner insists on the fact that idiot or bastard are not clearly defined classes on which a random sample of speakers could concur. By the same token, anyone who proffers an insult becomes vulnerable, being the only guarantor of that classification. In other words, the insulter is a classifier who takes extreme risks, unless they say it behind an anime avatar, in which case everything that they say is undermined forever. I shall not deal with the theme of the insult in greater depth, even if I were capable of doing so. What interests me in this example is how it reminds us of something that sociologists and others often forget, which is that problems of classification are not necessarily and exclusively conceptual issues. The insult is typically one of those practical classifications in which the classifier commits their whole being and their whole sense of self. The classifier takes a risk without consciously intending to. We need this kind of in vitro observation because it contradicts the impressions that sociologists frequently record when they ask the object of their inquiry to become classifiers. I wish I could have brought you some questionnaires produced by titular accredited sociologists who ask the objects of their inquiry to classify themselves. Unfortunately, we sometimes consign to the waste bin things that are bad research, but would be extremely useful documents. The sociologist is, in a way, imposing his status as teacher of the social world onto the objects of his scientific analysis when he asks them to classify themselves. What class do you think you belong to? How many classes do you think exists? If we divide society into 5 classes, where do you think you would fit in? Do you think that you belong to the middle classes? In these cases, what people reply does not reveal anything very much. To dismiss a stupid question, we reply in terms that minimize the likelihood of seeming stupid. The news for anyone here is a sociologist. The news for anyone here who is a sociologist is that the objects of your inquiry have found 1,000 ways of telling you that you are an idiot, generally very politely and euphemistically. Meaning that if a person takes your stupid question seriously and plays into it, there's a chance they might be telling you that you are an idiot. And he is saying that when it comes to questions like, what class do you Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Did we
okay. Oh, my headphones.
Oh, did your shit drop out? Ugh.
My headphones said they lost connection, but we're here. But yeah, questions like what class do you think you belong to are stupid. And they're stupid for the reasons that he'll get into as we proceed. But the point is you're taking intellectual constructions and setting up your questionnaire in a way that forces the other person to think in your terms, but this is not like coming from their life, right? You're inserting your thing into their discourse, but their discourse is not, or at least not necessarily, going to usually entail the kinds of terminology you're forcing into their speech. You're forcing them into a cookie cutter that is shaped to your ends. This is obviously like a self-confirming, self-cherry picking kind of science. It's not very empirical after all.
Yeah, you're doing an imposition, you're doing a violence. And I say violence sensationally, but it's also true. That is a type of not allowing them to actually be what they are, but forcing them into your box. And you're changing them. In that operation, like you are not you're like, no, I don't care what you are. I care what I'm calling you.
Which we can just say from now on, whenever we refer to anything being violent in this sense, we'll just say in the French sense. You're doing them a violence in the French sense.
It's there's a difference with an once.
Yeah. The problem of the insult makes us realize that the process of classification in everyday life is a practical operation with concrete aims and consequences that implicate the person who pursues those aims. It is a risky operation in which the person who judges lays himself or herself open to being judged. As I mentioned last time, the child's counterattack, it takes one to see one, shows that there is a whole rhetoric of the insult. This kind of symbolic struggle, of which the insult is one example, reminds us of something we ought not to forget. that the problems of classification are something more than what scholars make of them in their research, when they treat them merely as problems of analysis and judgment.
The act of institution. Also, Rudy, or Jacob, if you're still there, let us know how the audio's doing. The act of institution. To continue for a moment, using one of Rouette's notes, you're an imbecile, according to Milner, is not, despite appearances to the contrary, a parallel to you're a teacher. The first sentence differs from the second in that its very utterance necessarily produces pragmatic effects. It is an insult. Whence the assimilation to the performative made by Milner. But we should note that if we think of the rather uncommon cases where it would be natural to speak the words, you're a teacher, this sentence could also include a performative, although not necessarily insulting, implication. For instance, it might mean something like, I appoint you to be a teacher. This observation is at the heart of what I would say if I had to construct a theory of the insult. I find it interesting that the linguist consigns to a note in passing something that seems crucial to me. This is a rather good example of the relationship between two neighboring disciplines that virtually ignore each other's perspective. Rouette's remark seems important to me because the phrase, you're a bastard, could have a status equivalent to, you're a teacher, but only if you're a teacher were used in a very specific case. In fact, the language would not be so familiar, or would not use the, what the hell is that? To form of address in French? Okay, to. To nominate someone as a teacher, you would say, you are appointed teacher. TU.
Yeah, for Theory Underground.
Oh, yeah. You would say, you are appointed teacher, handing them a parchment scroll, as in certain American universities, where in a ritual ceremony, the candidate receives a title, giving them the right to exercise the function of teacher. If you say, you are a teacher in an act of nomination, you accomplish an act of institution. Rouette's remark, if you take it literally, means that the insult, you're an absolute idiot, and the nomination, you're a teacher, are two elements of the same class. This is the class of acts of nomination that I shall call the class of acts of institution. That is, acts whereby one signifies something to someone, understanding the term to signify to include both its sense in linguistic theory as a synonym of to communicate, I signify this or that by making certain gestures, and the sense whereby I signify something to you means I call on you. I expect you, or I order you, to be what I tell you that you are. I think this is the correct definition of the performative. I shall not get involved in the subtle differences between the different meanings of the word performative. I shall stay for the moment with the original meaning that Austin gave to the word, while he still had control over it, before the word became the subject of hair-splitting squabbles among linguists. I state this for any... But I wanted to be a linguist, and I still do want to be a linguist. But it's also like, yeah, linguists are fucking stupid, and they get shit wrong all the time, and they do this like positing the presuppositions, and they never back it up. They don't stand on business. So I like how he's like taking the piss out of them.
Yeah, and I like, so, and this is worth highlighting, all of this talk of the performative. Of course, people might think of Judith Butler and gender being performative, and that's correct in the sense that she's getting that, they are getting that from, I think she said that she wanted to cash in on the non-binary symbolic capital that's been created. She basically was just like, I might as well get something out of this. But anyway, Butler and the idea of the performative, it comes from Jane Austen, which is what which is what linguists are talking about that Bourdieu is currently referring to. And he's basically saying these statements where it's like, I call on you, I expect you, I order you, these are performative. I think that another way of saying this is like normative. Anything that's normative, like meaning it's obligatory.
Yeah, but whereas like with normative, like with performative, it is like you are performing it, whereas normative doesn't have to be like a singular subject.
Right.
Normative can be this kind of norms as opposed to laws. Right. Whereas like the performative is coming from an embodied subject.
There you go. So
it's the same.
It interpolates you. It interpolates a subject. The performative statement is basically it's a normative injunction for an individual to do something.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we were to say, well, people don't poop in the kitchen, then that would be
that's a normative.
That's normative. But if we say, Nance, don't poop in the kitchen, then that'd be performative.
Right, because then you're like bestowing upon me this responsibility of I am one who poops in the kitchen sometimes, and so and so you're telling me don't do this,
which is true. You know, everyone knows.
I mean, dude, you do it once, and you're known as the guy for the rest of your life.
Yeah. 10 years later, people are gonna keep bringing it up, and then Nance and we'll all be like, remember when Nance thought pooping in the kitchen would be the next big thing? Wrong. It's not the next big thing.
I'll still have my shitty podcast and I'll be like, guys, you got to listen to me. I was there back in 2024. I was shitting in kitchens.
Bathrooms are a social construct. Yeah.
Look, dude, this is going to happen on TikTok. Now there's going to be TikTokers shitting in kitchens. And we just predicted it and we just spoke it into existence.
I love it. Mike said, this is why I had to renovate my tiny house. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Bing bong, bing bong. Hold on 1 second. I shall stay for the moment with the original meaning that Austin gave to the word while he still had control over it before the word became the subject of hair-splitting squabbles among linguists. I state this for anyone among you who might find my initial hypothesis too simplistic. In this light, the insult and nomination would belong to the same class of acts that we might call institutional, whether positive or negative. The positive institutional act, for instance, consists in designating someone as worthy of holding a position. Negative institutional acts, it would be better to call them acts of destitution or degradation, consist in depriving someone of the dignity that has been granted them. Insult or abuse would then be a subclass of acts of destitution, itself a subclass of positive or negative institutional acts in general. So yeah, that's like symbolically determining you are a teacher, which could be performative if I were the authority and I were bestowing upon you this role or title or diploma. But it can also be this institutional act that grants you the prestige of you are my teacher. So like from and I guess even going to the individual level, like necessarily from that subjective position, there's already implicit prestige in there because you are my teacher. But you are the idiot. You are an idiot. I am determining that you will never have this prestige.
Like if you think of the dean of the honors college saying, just in a conversation, whether it's casual or from the podium, it doesn't matter if they say that somebody's a teacher and it's just like, yeah, that person as a teacher, blah, 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 blah. Well, then that has this sort of function. Whereas like that person in that position, if they were like, yeah, well, Dave's a teacher and they keeps talking or they say, yeah, well, Dave's a teacher. And then they kind of like raise their eyebrows like this, like that would be the act of destitution we're talking about here. There's obviously going to be a difference between like a formal, now we're taking back your right to teach, now we're actually canceling your diploma, like now we're retroactively, erasing everything we've said about. There's a difference between that and then he's a teacher. Like there is a difference, but the point is it comes down to that person's position. And for Bourdieu, that's going to be an objective position because somebody saying he's a teacher and raising their eyebrows just because they are an anime avatar having, 15 to 35-year-old on YouTube, it's different, right? It's very different. Like the weight that comment carries is very different. Yet at the same time, people feel like it's saying something. A person from their little sovereign throne that looks like a toilet, right? From the sovereign throne. That comment, it feels like you're the dean of the honors college when you drop that insult into someone's comment section, right?
And that is kind of endemic to the platforms, endemic to the medium itself, and that is why we need self-legitimation. We need the institution because all the fields are flattened out. Everything is this like horizontalist. Like and you know what? I could be an expert. I could be the foremost expert on philology, taking a shit on my phone, leaving a shitty comment on someone's YouTube channel. It could be true, but I also could be a fucking idiot who eats paint chips, and there's no way to know the difference.
And at the point that you start trying to prove that you are the former and not the latter, just the attempt to prove it disqualifies you.
You lost the game.
If you're trying to convince people in a YouTube comment section that they should take you seriously.
Yeah. Okay, guy. Okay.
Yeah.
You lost the game, dude.
He's like, but guys, I predicted podcasts would be a big deal.
We're teasing this guy too much, man. Okay. I would like to use these examples in order to investigate the nature of those acts through which an individual or a group, or more often an individual delegated by a group, establishes another individual or entity as consecrated, as nominated. This question, although very general, is central to the issue of classification, as you will see. Because the sociologist will constantly encounter among the objects of his studies individuals who are already instituted and classified. The difficulty for the sociologist, as I said the other day, lies in the fact that the social agents he gets to study have been classified in advance, and the sociologist must recognize that he is dealing with people already classified. You will see that this has important consequences. Oh shit. As the insult belongs to the class of performatives understood as a right of institution, following Austin's original formulation, so abuse occupies a special position within this particular class of rights of institution. A remark by Rouet shows that he was well aware of this, although he is not concerned with sociology. I think, in fact, that he practices sociology without realizing it, which shows you that you need to know what you are doing when you practice linguistics, and especially pragmatics. The person who pronounces the insult takes a risk. Let me reread that without the parenthetical. A remark by Rouet shows that he was well aware of this, although he is not concerned with sociology. The person who pronounces the insult takes a risk. The insult then has a special status within the category of the rights of degradation, which have been described by an American ethnomethodologist, Garfinkel, in an article where he analyzes the right where an officer is stripped of his epaulets. The official right of degradation can only be accomplished by an official personage. We might say that in order to degrade someone, you need rank, say the grade of general, whereas to insult a car driver in the street, you can be a simple idios, a mere man in the street. By saying, "You're an idiot," I am saying that I am an individual. I lay myself open. Thus, abuse or insult imply a private ritual, idios, a singular rite committing no one but its author. The ethnologist is familiar with this kind of ritual. There are, for instance, the rituals of amorous magic, which are practiced under cover of darkness, usually by women in societies where the division of labor between the sexes assigns a negative role to women, as is often the case. And these private rituals are opposed to the public. Official rituals performed by the whole group, at any rate in the presence of the whole group and by an individual mandated by the group, who is authorized to speak on behalf of the group and has the authority to practice an act of degradation on behalf of the group. So it's a popular thing on the internet to say, stay out of X people's business. Don't talk over X people, right? And it's also popular to do the thing in reverse and say, well, I'm a cishet white man, so I'm like, people unironically say they're the most persecuted group in the world. But in a social sense, it's not like they're entirely wrong about that. Like in a sense, you are told to shut the fuck up if you're a cishet white normative man. You are told, don't speak over women, don't speak over black people, don't speak over black women, don't speak over black trans femme. Like, so with that, like, tailorization of the discourse, you also have people who claim that they have the symbolic weight of their community. I represent the black community. I represent the trans femme community. I represent my community.
At Theory Underground, Nance represents Chicanos. All of them. Every one of them that's ever lived.
Every single one.
Ever will.
Every single one. But like
a children.
So going back to how the DSM has been more like hyper specialized, like our society, the world we live in is being hyper specialized, and niches are getting deeper, and niches are getting more specific to the particular. And so people, there's probably millions of people on the internet who think of themselves as representatives of a broader class. And they may have some symbolic, if not institutional, support because they have a Discord server with 25 people who share their proclivities and preferences and eccentricities, and they have been kind of lauded as the group representative.
I want to tie it back in really quick to something from last time, which was that the root idiot, the root to the word idiot, idios, has to do with being radically singular, which means like cut off from like anything really. And in that sense, you can be too original. You know, you can be, you're not able to bring it into relation with anything else. You're like, you're just engaging in psychedelic dude bro babble. Well, this is a great tie-in to that, because he's bringing back how to call somebody an idiot is to engage in this sort of, the frame of it is like you're taking up the standpoint of the person who's, well, it's my opinion. It's just my opinion, dude. If you are taking up the standpoint of, well, it's just my opinion, you are discrediting yourself from the outset. Yep. And now he's tying this in to private spheres with private sort of, covens of witches being like the extreme example, right? Because he's thinking in historical material terms. Well, in historical material terms, the most secretive of the secret societies, which is to say the most private of the private societies, were intended to be these ones where it's witches, right? And he alludes to like the reason why they had to be so private, because women were excluded from public life, right? And so they had their own kind of thing going on under the cover of darkness, right? And all I was saying to you, Caravaggio, in the chat was just that, he had said, LOL, are the boys deliberately being meta, denigrating the dude for being a podcaster? And I said, no. And he said, okay, my bad. I'm reading too much into it. And I said, no, you just didn't hear the first 20 minutes, which is fine. I'm just saying, I understand that when you don't emote in a comment, it can just seem blunt, like I'm dunking. I'm not dunking. I'm just saying, no, it's not that you're reading too much into it. We're just not making a point about him being a podcaster. Our point is about saying you should listen to me because I was right about a prediction. And the prediction in question is saying that podcasting is going to be a big deal. So he was right about that. Therefore, you should listen to him on everything else, right? That's
Yes.
the unironic point that he was making. Yeah. So not him being a podcaster. Podcaster is a value neutral term in my world.
Yeah. Missing context, but it's okay because guess what? We all find ourselves always already here, and we are also always already missing context. But when we come together and we collaborate, we can try to make up for the missing context in one another by being gracious, and rather than getting offended and upset, genuinely asking questions and genuinely accepting feedback and clarification. So we're doing good, guys.
Stevie J says, I've been told so many times that I must elevate and amplify minority/oppressed voices as if I'm a tool to be used, and they are the main character. Intersectionality gets old very quickly. Yeah, dude. Very boring.
Yeah. It and it's a shame because I think the people who are most in need get passed over due to the intersectionality heavy discourse, because people get exhausted. You just get done. You get done hearing about how these people necessarily have some essential universal cosmic qualities that makes them more deserving of attention and care and concern than you. But it also fetishizes and sensationalizes, and people wind up, the cracks get widened and more people fall through them when these things are operationalized, when they become political platforms. It's fucking horrible. So I know personally sometimes I react against intersectionality publicly, and I just felt the need to say it's not because I don't care, it's because I do care. And the intersectionality discourse is harmful to the people most in need.
Yeah. I'll just say that reverse fascism is a stupid strategy. I don't care about the people in need. I don't care about the people who are oppressed. I don't care about anybody who's starving to death and dying. I'm a cold-hearted, compassion-fatigued asshole on the internet, and no one should listen to me if you're trying to sit there trying to decide if you should take me seriously based off of how much I care. If you think that how much I care matters, you should just stop listening. I think I'll just be extreme. I don't care about anybody. Let's just keep reading.
For sure. Although
Nance does care though. Nance cares a lot. I don't at all.
Okay. The other day I invoked Heidegger's reference to the etymology of the word category. Category comes from the Greek, which means publicly accuse, and we think of our public prosecutor. The public prosecutor is someone who classifies and who says, you are sentenced to so many years, you are demoted, etc. And that classification carries the force of law. Someone classified by a public prosecutor delegated by the whole group and pronouncing the verdict before and in the name of the whole group has no right to argue. That person is objectively stigmatized, whereas someone classified by a mere individual venting their spleen is entitled to answer back. We see that behind the problem of classification, there lies the absolutely fundamental problem of the authority wielded by the classifier in their act of classification. Our analysis of the insult allows us to raise a certain number of questions. Classifications may be practical. We can make classifications when engaged in the most everyday, commonplace, and insignificant practice. We need to look into the relations between these acts and the scholar's acts of classification. Such acts lead us as sociologists to wonder whose authority it is that authorizes these classifications. In other words, when we raise the question of classification, we need to know that there is a question of authority at stake. This is what we can learn from the examples of insult or abuse. That's just like your opinion, man. We might take the I actually have never seen that movie. We might take the analysis. Yeah.
Two things now. First of all, just fucking watch it, man. Second of all, I think that a lot of people think that that's just your opinion, man, is the checkmate on pretty much any sort of unsolicited kinds of unsavory opinions are going to encounter out in the wild, wild west of the fully domesticated internet. But the thing is that asking a person on what authority they say that is potentially more damning, which now I'm not saying say it that way. That would be the most autistic and completely like, oh, like no one else is going to get it kind of way to say
my
it.
lady?
Yeah. On whose authority do you say these things? It's not going to work to do that. But you could say something
you can
like,
say, well, what informs you? Like how, like what gives you the right to say that? Or maybe not what gives you the right, but like, or simply asking why could be like, why? Why are you saying that?
yeah, exactly. And I think that the I can't find the actual example right now, but I've seen it a couple times in the comment sections over the last few weeks at Theory Underground, where someone's coming along on a Why Left episode and it's being like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And then someone else will be like, oh, so am I to deduce from what you're saying that you both have read more and know what they should read? Really? Tell us more. You know, anything along those lines is a sort of, it's getting at exactly what he's saying, which is not just like that's your opinion, dude, but the other side of it, which is on what authority do you say this?
Yeah, it implicates the accuser, and I think it, you know, encourages them to investigate and interrogate their own positions. Like yesterday in the live stream of the reading of chapter 2 of The Way Is Shut, there was a person who had some good questions, but they also were dismissive of some of the things. And I was like, you should read the book. Like rather than just repeating what you heard Sam Cedar say, like engage with the book as a holistic argument rather than like trying to pick this apart piecemeal. Because I'm sure you've heard some things that sound similar to some of the things that Benjamin's saying, but I promise you haven't read the book. But I was trying to be polite and welcoming and encourage them to read the book because I think it's worth reading. So,
yeah.
it's
oh, I just overheard you reading thousands of words from somebody with a PhD from Cambridge, and I understood at least 2 sentences enough to say, wait a minute, let me show you that I actually know something that this guy doesn't. And it's like, well, actually the chances are very obviously in your favor that there is something that you see. No, not slim. There are huge, to me, it's like it's not even a coin toss. The fact is that every one of you has something that you can offer to a person with a PhD. Every one of you has something that they're missing. I absolutely believe that. Yeah. The point is just you actually have to sit with what they're saying and do your best to defend it from knee-jerk whataboutisms that your fucking peasant brain is going necessarily to come up with as you're listening to things. And most people who come around for philosophy and theory, it's a kind of content that they're in the habit of consuming where the meta thing that they're consuming is just like listening and being like, oh, they didn't hear that.
Deconstruction.
They didn't think this. And, they missed this. It's like this sort of nitpicky thing.
Yep.
There's more of it in this sphere than almost any other content sphere, right?
Yeah.
This is why so many people can listen to someone that they fucking hate, right? So,
mhm.
yeah. All right, you got one paragraph here.
We might take the analysis of insult or abuse further. It would be interesting to discuss whether the two words are perfectly synonymous, although I do not intend to do so here. Abuse, in this perspective, appears to be an attempt or a claim to exercise authority. As Ducrot argues when discussing the performative, the word claim is important, for it has a psychological connotations. Abuse thus appears to be an attempt or a claim to destitute, that is, to perform the opposite of instituting, to disqualify and discredit, an important word in which there is reference to credence or belief. To discredit someone is to strip them of what they have been granted by common credence, by a magical act of domination. I shall return to this magic that engages only its author, but implicates that author entirely, to the point where they risk coming to an untimely end. You can risk your life by trading insult for insult. In a society of honor, insulting someone's mother, for example, may put your life at risk. These are very serious matters, and if we moved beyond the insult and went on to look into the question of the relations between scholarship and politics, often considered in rather rhetorical and ritualistic terms, I think that we would see more clearly that a scholarly classification does in fact implicate its author profoundly as scientific subject, but hardly at all as political subject. Bing bong. And I laughed because just the other day we were talking about mom jokes and how mom jokes derailed me as a child.
Yeah,
I faced severe legal consequences for poorly reacting to mom jokes.
We'll come right back to mom jokes right after this. Let's see if I can get this thing to work.
Oh, is it still fucking up? Doing that like weird restart thing or whatever?
Cesar, you're enjoying. I don't know
What you are about to hear is a short DIY ad made by the Theory Underground crew, just to remind you of the best way to keep up with and support this kind of content.
If you're still listening to this, then the chances are you're enjoying it, which means you would maybe like other stuff that Theory Underground publishes. So make sure that you've subscribed and that you click the little bell. It turns out only 40% of people who subscribe click the little bell. But I think that at least 20% of the rest of y'all just don't realize how much pushing the bell really makes a difference, especially considering the fact that at TU, we tend to put stuff out without warning. There's no schedule. This is coming from the space of my freedom. I just do this stuff when I can, and I don't want to live by a schedule because I'm sorry, I've got other things that are supposedly more important. All right. Well, with that said, there's also liking and commenting and subscribing. It obviously makes a difference. If you're one of those people who considers yourself a sort of recluse, well then maybe don't worry about the commenting, but you can at least click the like button. It does make a difference. Also, if you're listening to this on the podcast, please leave us a favorable review on your favorite platform. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Now, Nance is stepping away to go make a tea, which is the kind of thing that you're supposed to do in the kitchen, Nance.
Shit. I was going to poop too while I'm there. I guess I can't now.
Yeah. So before I start reading the next section, I just wanted to say a quick thing about societies of honor. And my basic point is this. In a society of honor, you say something about a person's mom, and now they have to fight you. And so, of course, we could think about Nance back in the day actually being like, oh, I'm going to fight somebody because that person said something bad about my mom. And, of course, we could think about teenagers and how talking about somebody's mom is often a good way to start a fight, but also just general working class joking is to always just go, oh, your mom. Or, I'd say your mom and that's what she said are probably the two The two jokes that'll get you the most traction in any workspace, as long as you play them right, you have to actually have some kind of a sense for like when and how. So I'll just put that out there. But as long as you know when and how, you can get a lot of mileage off those two jokes. But I want to make a point here. Nobody or very few people think that a mom joke is going to be an actual risk of your life, right? Very few people think that today. Of course, we think of like Westerns as an example of a place where it's true. Like if you insult somebody in a Western, oh, now it's time to go out and draw, what's it called when two people face off? A duel. A duel.
A shoot down or showdown at high noon. A duel.
Yeah, exactly. And my point is this:
we're good at words, dude.
That's an interesting sort of remnant from honor societies, but it's not necessarily the way the things work in, say, the state of nature. And so what I want to really highlight is that calling into question whether somebody's mother was or was not a whore in a society where your bloodline is your only claim to legitimacy, that's the key there. There's a structural objective field. And so if a person is like a duke and then you say, yeah, but your mother was a whore, the point is, yeah, you are sitting on this estate, you have like this title and all of this authority that comes with it, all this wealth that comes with it. But when you say that person's mother is a whore, you're actually calling into question the legitimation of that standing. It's not
it could become a concrete act of destitution rather than this symbolic play.
Yeah, it's not. Whereas, I mean, if it's in some old Western town and you say, oh yeah, Buckeye Silver, his mom's a whore, it's like he's going to pick a fight with you because he's got to, because he will become the butt of everybody's jokes in town if he doesn't stand up for himself. And that's more like the street cred prison mentality. Like you just got to do that. But that's very different from like, no, you better actually focus on getting your fucking case together here because your mom is not a whore, you know?
Your mom is not a whore. Yeah. But no, I mean that is what allows wealth in these old societies. Like, yeah, it was your bloodline. It wasn't so much your never drop or explain the kitchen poop. Okay, cool. It was the case
Richard
that
Oates.
like if your mother was a whore, you would become destitute rather than just a mockery.
Right. And so the oomph of one of these acts or like some performatives, right? This insult, the oomph to it, like the fact that it carries real world consequences, has something to do with the historical time and place, and specifically the ways that authority and wealth and prestige are legitimated. Okay.
Capital.
So if you go and say, no, the president of this organization or the dean of the honors college, his mom's a whore, people are going to be like, oh, so you're insulting him. And it doesn't really mean what you think it means, right? Unless, of course, you just kind of realize that your opinion doesn't really matter that much. The insult as magical behavior. The insult may then be described as magical behavior with properties that I shall return to later. What I have been saying about the insult, once we consider it as a performative, may be valid for the whole set of performatives. It is magical behavior that aims to act, but symbolically without resorting to action, like a curse or a blessing. Furthermore, it is magical activity that is conducted by and for the individual. Unlike the ritual of degradation, it has no institutional guarantee, authorization, or authority, just like judgments of taste which constitute another form of classification and are often judgments of distaste. Most often, when I express disgust or distaste, what I am actually saying is that I dislike someone else's tastes, right? So if you say, ugh, I don't know. I just saw the new movie Wicked. If you were like, ugh, Wicked, that expression of distaste is more likely an expression of distaste for someone else's tastes. And if that's not a specific other person's tastes, then probably a whole category of people's tastes, like, for instance, theater people or musicals in general, or musicals that have gone to film, right? All three of those are things that you could take issue with. By the way, it's a pretty good movie. It's a pretty good movie. You have to kind of ignore or you either have to ignore or bracket out what's the term I'm looking for? Like the public relations handling of the film Wicked. It's like when they're on tour doing all the podcast stops and interviews, and it's unbearably cringe, the kinds of conversations that they're having revolving around the film Wicked. But
it's all marketing copy. They
Yeah.
go interview with MTV and they're like, "Oh, it's such a great film. We love you."
Right. And it's almost like now that the film itself is just a great film, but then and there's a little bit of stuff you could argue is like woke or whatever, even though most of that is from, because this musical was written prior to the woke era. So it's like, basic stuff that was already there all along kind of gets resignified now. But the people on the podcast tour circuit are retroactively turning it into this safetyist therapism sort of HR fucking intersectional discourse just in the space of the podcast interviews, right? But here the thing is when I said unbearably cringe, that is not objective. That is not an objective statement. And it's also not like I say that from the standpoint of one who holds the authority to say such things. Like if I was the president of the Broadway Society or what have you. No, instead, I am here on the internet saying it, and everyone should be, at this point, well aware that if you hear the term cringe or the term based, or, analogs such as cool or uncool or beautiful or ugly, what we're getting at is exactly what Bourdieu is talking about here with taste and distaste, which is it's never just saying a fact. It's never just saying a fact about what you genuinely do or do not like. It's almost always, and even when you least expect it, saying something about not just other people, but the actual field of social relations themselves. Right. So anyway, he says, most often when I express disgust or distaste, what I'm actually saying is that I dislike someone else's tastes. Right. So if you say that HR woke scoldy shit is unbearably cringe, well, what you're saying is that there's a certain kind of person who likes that kind of stuff and you don't want to be associated with them. Right. That's it. That is what I was just saying. You can confirm this by looking at the fashion columns in your magazines or newspapers or any other articles where judgments of taste are involved. Judgments of taste are nearly always indirect judgments of distaste. Like insults, they implicate and compromise their author, who acts as a classifier, but is exposed as aggressor. This magical action, then, is a private act, as opposed to an official ritual of destitution or a legitimate accusation leveled by the public prosecutor. A third characteristic is that this magical action, although performed in a personal capacity with no institutional guarantee, does have a certain force. I shall return to this notion, which Austin and later linguists called the illocutionary force, that is, the force inherent in discourse. The force of this symbolic act depend partly, albeit only partly, on its form. Oddly enough, the fairly numerous linguists I have read forget that the social force of an insult, its power to strike home, depends on its form. I like how he says fairly numerous and print it like as a parenthetical aside. He's like, the linguists I've read a lot.
There's a
Yeah.
grip. There's a whole
Yeah.
grip.
Yeah. He's like, fuck, guys, it's a shit ton. I know I'm going to keep referencing like 3 here, but just so you know, lots. And I mean, I believe him. You know, I
Yeah,
do
fuck
believe
yeah.
him. Yeah. I mean, linguistics was all the rage. I mean, these French guys were pretty much just German philosophy, but taking linguistics seriously.
Yep.
I have read, sorry, no, that's not the beginning of that sentence. I take an example from a book by Jacques Saillard, which is in English.
You don't eat bread. That won't cost you? Pot of pain?
That won't cost you, which collects a whole series of popular expressions with their historical origins. Saillard records a ritual snub that I am sure you all know. It goes literally, stop your chariot, Ben-Hur, with the sense here being, get off your high horse. This saying has, I like that, by the way. Stop your chariot, Ben-Hur. Hands up in the chat if you've seen the old movie Ben-Hur. That shit was bomb.
I saw The Life of Brian, and the cover art of that movie is like the same cover art as Ben-Hur, and so I was like, well, I guess I need to watch Ben-Hur now.
Yeah.
Good movie. It's a classic.
Yeah, no, there you go. Stop your chariot, Ben-Hur, with the sense of being get off your high horse, then develops, he says, it evolved from that. So I'm gonna try to like summarize a little bit without getting into the French, right? So it's evolved from where the word for chariot meant to split hairs. So like, hence, stop being clever, stop rabbiting on, get off your high horse. This is a classic case of the evolution of a popular saying acknowledged by the ethnologists. These sayings come down over the centuries, but are constantly transformed, which is in fact why they last so long. We no longer understand hair splitting, but hear in it chariot. This evolution is normal, but the insulter wants the audience to join in the mockery in order to give more force to the insult, and as this force can only be derived from the audience, the form of the insult has to be adjusted. In adding Ben-Hur to the phrase, the insulter claims a kind of spurious authority by using the classical reference in a jocular context, at once mocking it and turning it into a sort of inverse barbarism, or cheap rhyming slang. Its power derives from the complicity this creates. So you can tell that somebody at some point said to Bourdieu, get off your high horse. Yeah.
And he's like, fuck that guy, dude.
Yeah. I'm going to make a whole theory about this. What I am saying about the function of insult or abuse is exactly similar to what we know of the role of the bard in archaic societies. It seems strange to describe the insult in this way, but without wishing to be too populist, I think there is a popular inventiveness which springs from the same source as poetic creation, and which consists in making a personal variant of an impersonal, common, well-known theme, while clearly remaining within the norms of the group. In so-called archaic societies, the poet is someone who is able to take a well-known formula and make it their own. In Greek verse, it might be a line from Simonides of Chios that has come down through the centuries and is reworked and slightly reformulated each time. The poet is someone who knows how to choose the right moment to take a well-known formula and modify it to suit present circumstances, thus earning the approval of the audience and pleasing them at the same time. I love his little definition of the poet here. And obviously the way he sets it up, you can see how it's going to relate to the bard, or also the court jester, right? Which is what he's kind of getting at here. There's a way that you can take something that is a popular form, but then you can like bring in some classical reference and then you invert it in some way so that the populace or the popular sort of force is on your side, even though you're being classical. I think Jordan Peterson's a good example of this, right? But pretty much the attention economy is basically just fallen professionals taking what they have from the university and turning it into the popular discourse. And the ones that we see are the ones who are good at that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what my article from today that I referenced earlier is actually all about. So if you're curious about that, you can go look it up. I'll share the link in the chat. It's the Are Autodidacts Just Pseudo Professionals, in which I'm inspired by Kier's intervention on one of my favorite themes in Benjamin Studebaker's book, The Way is Shut. Basically, the theme is fallen versus rump professionals. Rump professionals are established, think of people with tenure. People with tenure would be rump professionals, as opposed to fallen professionals who are people who went to college, but now they are earning basically the same wages they would have even if they had never gone to college. And so the learning to speak in a culturally distinct way is one of the only things they really have to show for all of that education. And it's a very important part of their identity. And as Studebaker points out, they will fall apart if they were to stop talking this way. And, I'm a perfect example of this, $60,000 of debt, I studied philosophy, and here I am on the internet doing stuff for you guys, right? Whereas Nance is going to be an example of a different kind of internet person, a person who didn't go to college but really wanted to. It's part of his fantasy structure. And so we both are representatives of the fallen professional and the autodidact or pseudo-professional. And so like my whole question here is, are autodidacts just pseudo-professionals? Well, if they are, then Nance is just a pseudo-professional. That's what that means. And of course, autodidacts are people who study for the love of study itself, whereas pseudo-professionals study acting like they're doing it for the love of itself or for a calling, when in reality, what they're really doing it for is some kind of symbolic capital, but they're posers. That's the point. So the question is like, what if all people who study things just because they love to are actually just doing that because they want some clout, some sort of cultural distinction? And it's not just a question. It's not a superficial question. It's a deep question that cuts to the heart of all of us, I think, insofar as we feel like we're doing something important, but also realize that on the other side of it, all the time, there is this sort of lingering, but like, there are objective motivations for why I would do this, and so it's something I wanted to tease out. I include some of my favorite sections from The Way is Shut, as well as a bunch of the conversation that you guys were having on your channel yesterday. And I bring in a very important question, which is, can the mechanisms and norms of movement capture by elites be reversed by audience capturing their intermediaries? So there's a question about social change at stake. And if you can think back to, assuming you were there for episode 1 of the Self-Legitimating Johnsons, what Nance and I did last week for this series, then the answer is, and this is mostly on the B side, which will become available soon, the answer is, we do think that people like me and Nance doing what we're doing eventually, as long as we can develop it, has serious potential to change things for the better in institutions, either in ways that render those institutions redundant and obviously so that they are consolidated into new forms, or to put the fire under their rump, so to speak, to get them to do something other than what they have tended to do, which is movement capture via the most divisive discourses possible. This is the classical definition of charismatic behavior. For anyone not in the know, the term charismatic is taken from Weber. Charisma, the blessing or the gift of being able to say things simply. Charismatic authority is the opposite of the administrative type of authority. The general who degrades an officer is mandated by the group, and he need have no charisma. He may be misshapen, lame, or a hunchback, and nonetheless accomplish an act of degradation, because he does not do so in his own name, but accomplishes this magical action on behalf of the group mandating him. In the case of the idios logos, the singular idiot, who has no resources but his own to draw on, the only way to have a modicum of illocutionary force is to use charisma, which is, in this case, a sort of virtuosity. Weber speaks of religious virtuosity. That for the case in point consists in taking a hackneyed figure of speech or trope and converting it into something personal, but at the same time, obviously, something that is common knowledge. Because if no one knew who Ben-Hur was, and no one understood the play on words, the joke would fall flat. It has to be at once personal and common, and that is how the individual idiot, the author of the successful insult which sends the whole pub into fits of laughter, gets their support and acquires an authority that is necessarily collective, the authority of the group.
This is why, or maybe not this is why, but I think this is an articulation of why it is almost a necessary ingredient to be a media figure, especially a left media figure, and have this performative humility, like to do the self-deprecating joke, and to be willing to like hang your ass out a little bit, like show your ass a little bit to the world to get people to identify it, like because it's playing on this diffuse sense of lack that I think we all share. Like, I want to ingratiate myself to all of you fucking people out there on the internet that are watching this. I want to ingratiate myself to you, and one tactic to do so is to make self-deprecating jokes and to perform, oh, I am the idiot, I am the jester, I am the fool, to try and gain some authority, to try and get you bought into what, you know, to get you to smell what I'm stepping in. But look, just because it's a known tactic doesn't mean it's necessarily always malicious.
No,
right?
Definitely not.
This is part of being aware of the meta-discourse of what's going on. But
Well,
it is also
charisma-
like it can become gross, like to
Oh,
see
it's-
people
it's-
overdo it.
It's bad. It's
Yeah.
like really bad. In fact, 98% of cheap, quirky banter that you encounter on like shows, cheap shows where they have to banter, like that is usually just like what that's what you're getting at when you talk about it becoming gross, right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm trying to think of examples here, and the main example is one that I don't want to trash on. Not here, not now, at least. It's the sort of it's okay. Dropout TV. I'll just say it. Dropout TV. It's like knockoff SNL. In reality, it's much better than SNL.
I love Dropout.
It's Dropout TV is really funny. I like it a lot, but also, they are borderline too much of that cheek, quirky banter, the kind that you expect from like Disney adults and pretty much nobody else. And it's like, oh, look at us. We're always having fun and we all get along, but we can tease each other a little bit, right? Ha 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 ha. Yes, of course. And it's like, there is this thing, right? Now, just with having said that, bringing it back to this, the issue of charisma, I really like that he points out that charisma is the blessing or the gift of being able to say things simply. Now, the part of why that's special is because we have this little thing called the Mikey standard at Theory Underground, which is what? You don't really understand it if you can't say it to a person on a bar stool. Now, the very special thing about that definition is that it's not saying it to a 5th grader or a 5-year-old. Now, in the common vernacular, when people say you don't really understand something if you can't say it to a 5th grader, they will alternate between 5th grader and 5-year-old, which are not the same thing. But the point is like just in the popular vernacular, that is just like the standard. Well, the bar stool is special though, because it's more populist and also it means an adult, as opposed to like, it's like anybody who really thinks that you should be able to explain stuff to a 5-year-old or you don't understand it is insane. Because there's a lot of stuff you should not be able to explain to 5-year-olds. In fact, a lot of the problems with cultural progressivism's legitimacy crisis comes down to trying to explain things to 5-year-olds that probably should not be explained to them in the first place, you know? And so, leave them alone. Please leave the kids alone.
Leave Brittany and the kids alone.
You're making us look bad.
Yeah.
I know that, like, to make good lefty content, we're supposed to be like, no, you can tell children anything as long as you're doing it for progressive reasons. No.
Yeah, we just have to affirm them and do the affirmative thing.
Yeah, just
I do think
it's
believe all children. Dude, my kids are retards and they come up with all kinds of dumb shit. I do think it's interesting how that's like Richard Feynman was this physicist guy, and I think he's overblown. I like Feynman sucks, but that was
he has a lot of quotes on the internet. You know, he's a very quotable man.
Yeah, but he was like I think he was kind of an idiot, but he was a popular science popularizer, like the Neil deGrasse Tyson and the Bill Nye, and you know, love him or hate him, whatever. But like that was his quote. Like he was like, you don't understand physics unless you can teach it to an elementary schooler. And then it's kind of gone on to have this life now in like mainline pop culture. But it is like, it's funny. It's very pertinent to be like, leftist, stop trying to explain these complex structures to fucking children. Just stop, dude. It does, like, that discourse doesn't belong in kindergarten. I'm sorry, dude. Now, I do agree that the world we live in, there are a lot of children who don't get things that they need because their home life has been so fucking raped and pillaged by capital. So like people want to say like, oh, but what if these kids don't get access to these resources? I'm sorry, dude. We don't need a blanket approach. Like, I'm sorry. There's children on other continents right now who are getting raped and murdered. So we can have our cell phones and our DoorDash and our Amazon.com. Like, do you care about those children the same way that you might care about little Timmy in the suburbs who doesn't get his affirmation? They're both human tragedies, and I agree that they're both human tragedies. But when we're doing this, like turning the left into this weird, perverted, demented, vampiric thing, you're making it worse. Stop. Leave the kids alone. For real. Like, stop, dude.
When we're turning the left into this vampiric thing, or when we realize that we're participating in this thing that is this vampiric thing, which is the question of why left. But Stevie J said, an idiot admires complexity, a genius admires simplicity. That's a quote by Terry Davis, the internet's favorite schizophrenic. Well, I didn't know that he's the favorite schizophrenic, but good to know. Yeah, the idiot admires complexity, a genius admires simplicity point, I've seen it make the rounds. There is something special about being able to say something very complex in simple terms, but also unless you have specialized in something your whole fucking life, chances are you don't know if they're doing it well. And so the internet is the worst filter for selecting people who are good at this thing that involves simplifying. But to bring it all back to Mikey and his standard, the reason that his posts are so long and that he uses giant quotes is because he has to legitimate himself. See? Yeah. So it all comes back to self-legitimation. And the fact, and we did talk about this last week, it's just the point that it's not enough for us to come out here and do the thing and all point at each other and say, you're great, you're great, you're great. No, for it to actually constitute some form of legitimation outside of just a circle jerk, which is technically defined as a circle of jerks pointing at each other saying you're great, for it to be more than that, and also jerking each other off under the table with the other hand. So you're pointing with your right hand, jerking each other off with the left hand in a circle around a table. But all of you have to be dressed up as Spider-Man to really complete the circle here.
Yeah.
Okay. But outside of that, it's going to require something more. And this Mikey standard is one of those something more pieces to the recipe. What are the other pieces in the recipe? Well, you have to listen to the B side of last week's episode and or all of the content that I've ever done on this channel. So, either one, figure it out.
Yeah. Take your choice. Same, but different.
Yeah. So the Bourdieu says, I shall not take this further, but I think that this argument opens up an important debate. In the case of the insult, the classifier asserts their claim to a symbolic authority and claims it on their own account through the linguistic dexterity that earns them a reputation as a master of language. This is important for a social history of the insult and obviously for the problem that I want to discuss. I do not propose to take this summary analysis of the insult further, since it is not my principal concern. I remind you of what I said last time. I wanted to compare the problem of classification as encountered by the sociologist with the form in which the problem is encountered by zoologists or botanists, taking the example of the insult in order to highlight one specific difficulty, and also to give a more concrete and less scholarly face to the whole argument that I was putting forward, which is that, for the sociologist, the act of classification means playing a social game consisting partly in an exercise in reciprocal classification. In order to convey something of the nature of this infinitely spiraling game, where everyone is both classifier and classified by their own classifications, I chose the example of the insult. The function of this example was to show how the scientific act of classification, as practiced by the sociologist, has to deal with pre-existing acts of classification, which are not necessarily inspired by the desire for knowledge that motivates the sociologist, but may be driven by a desire for action, influence, or the imposition or abolition of power. Boom! So, in this paragraph, he really ties together what he's been doing this whole lecture so far. And this point about motivations, it's what we're always going to come back to with socioanalysis. And socioanalysis is one of the major themes of everything I've been doing for the last while here at Theory Underground, which is basically just to say, psychoanalysis wants to look at the unconscious motivations of the person on the couch in the psychoanalytic clinic, right? Well, the socioanalyst is also interested in the motivations, but isn't putting people into this one-to-one relation in the clinic, but is instead dealing with people out and about in life, in social fields established within and between institutions. And so when we're thinking about how people have motivations, right? It's like, is that motivation going to come down to the objet, or is it that there's actually symbolic capital to be won, right? Well, both might be getting at the same thing in different ways, but one of them gets us to the objective material conditions and constraints of the social field, right? Well, it's not just a desire for say, symbolic capital, but also, as he said, for action, influence, or the imposition of power. And then, of course, he also adds, or the abolition of power. right? But of course, the abolition of power is itself a kind of imposition of a kind of power. But now he brings it to this. He says, another question, how does the classification operated by the sociologist stand in relation to those of the botanist on the one hand and the insulter on the other? Is the sociologist closer to the insulter or the botanist? One difficulty with the narratives produced by sociologists is that they are often read with the same dispositions that we commonly employ to interpret the sense of any ordinary classificatory discourse, so that they are very often read as insults. We should look at more specific examples, but I shall leave it up to you to find them. The analysis of the insult thus seems to me to raise the question of the status of sociological discourse on the social world, that is, a science aiming to provide the neutral, universal discourse that Austin calls constative, which claims not to transform the world, but to state what is the case, which would be, purely descriptive, as philosophers of language say. So yeah, if you're purely descriptive, describing what is the case, Austin calls constative. We would think of like constitutive, maybe. I'm not sure.
I think it is.
No,
because it's like yeah, I mean it's like wholly descriptive, but it's not like constitutive is also has an element of like, I don't even know, like an ontology, whereas like this
100% for
constative is like, this is what it is. Like we're not returning to the things in themselves. We're describing the things in themselves.
Right. Ordinarily, the everyday social world is the place of the performative. I may be rushing into this rather too hastily, but I am ready to defend the thesis that the statements we make in everyday life are hardly ever merely constative. Even in the most anodyne utterances, there are effects of imposition, intimidation, and symbolic bluff. In other words, symbolic power relations are hidden in an adjective, a silence, or a grimace beneath the surface of the apparently most rigorously constitutive speech. This being the case, where a person's like, refers to somebody as fat offhandedly, and then you're like, why are you saying that? And then they go, I'm just describing it. It's like, no, you're fucking not, dude. No, you're fucking not.
You're accusing. You're fucking admonishing. You're expressing disgust.
You are judging them, saying that you know how their time and their energy would have been better spent, on a treadmill. And maybe you're right. Chances are everybody could benefit from more time on a treadmill, but also you don't know. And if you offhandedly refer to somebody as fat and then somebody calls you on it and then you're like, well, I'm just describing, it's like, how old are we? Come on now. Come on. But of course, we can also just actually make fun of somebody for being fat, and that's how we show them that we are their friend, right?
Yeah.
Which you might see me do from time to time, which is why sensitive people should never be my friends. Yeah. This being the case, we may say that scientific discourse will be a discourse aiming to subject the performative to its own constitutive ends. However, in a universe designed for the performative, to repeat in different terms what I said just now, it will be liable to revert to its performative function. Let me give you an example. Linguists who analyze the expression, "the meeting is open," show how this expression may be understood in two different ways. Firstly, as a constative, I am someone in the room and I say, the meeting is open. I state a fact. Or alternatively, I may be the chair of the meeting and say the meeting is open. I have used a different tone of voice, but I could use the very same tone. In saying the meeting is open in the performative mode, in using the verb in the performative mode, that is, with authority, with a mandate to do so, having the authority to do so and being authorized to do so, I am not merely noting that the meeting has begun, I actually make the meeting begin. And this phrase immediately becomes an inaugural right, opening the meeting, which would not be open or even exist without it. So it's kind of like how we made underground theory a thing, by putting a name on it, when of course it also was already sort of a thing. And then we talk about how we are opening up this pit. And it's like, yes, we are, but also by saying it, now we really are, right? That's kind of what he's getting at. Of course, did we really have the legitimacy to state that underground theory is in fact a thing at the beginning? Well, I mean, between the efforts of myself and Mikey at the very, in the last 7 years, combining forces, yeah, maybe sort of. It's kind of up for debate, but obviously there's something.
Yeah.
Now, what we get into in this next paragraph is absolutely essential for you post-Marxists. It's absolutely essential for anybody who's interested in class and how all of this stuff ties into it. He says, you could summarize my whole lecture series for the year as follows. The statement, there are two social classes, could be heard just like the meeting is open, in two ways. We might be saying, there are two social classes. It's a given fact. We are merely noting that there are two social classes. Or I may say, there are two social classes, if I have the authority to say it, and if the fact of saying it helps to bring them into being. When, for example, in the name of a certain Marxism, some people feel authorized to say there are two social classes, they are adopting a performative logic, and deciding on the truth of the proposition is a problem of verification far more than validation. In other words, when it functions as a performative, the phrase, there are two social classes, claims to verify itself. And if it is pronounced by the proper person, that is, the person who is able, for example, to trigger a class struggle, it will be verified. The question then is whether the performative power to verify it, to make it come true by virtue of saying it, is independent of the constative function. In order to bring the social classes into being, is it sufficient for me to have the authority to affirm their reality, or should the premise of their true existence be out there in the real world? So I wish to highlight this crucial problem immediately, at the risk of seeming enigmatic or oracular, because I want you to bear it in mind throughout my lecture course, even though I shall certainly stray away from it. I shall constantly have it in the back of my mind. What is the meaning of the expression, there are two social classes?
Dun, dun, dun.
So I guess I just want to say, this is not a thread that he loses. He is correct that he has to bring it back to this, but also it's always in the back of his mind. Everything that led up till this moment, I'm sure people are just thinking, he's talking between linguistics and sociology. How interesting. No, the concrete real-world application is that he is surrounded by Marxists who are saying that there are two classes, and he's over here just like, what is the meaning of this? How does meaning work when we come to classifying? And then earlier when he's talking about sociologists going to people and being like, are you a part of a class? Which class do you think that you belong to? And all this. What he's getting at is like what sociology has become, which is this constant bickering over classification and trying to fit people into these boxes, and then going to the people and trying to get them to conform to the boxes that they've been put in by the classifiers. And if we're in the post-class fractured mass, if we're in the post-class fractured mass, then obviously the old two-class theory is not going to work. If you want to know about the 5 main reasons that I focus on for why we are in the post-class fractured mass and not in the two-class situation, then you would have to go back to the lecture that I did on that. It's public. It's available. I did it with Anne, my wife. But the thing I want to point out is that Benjamin Studebaker at TUConn, he brought it back to this a couple of times. Because Elton L.K. of the Working Class Intelligentsia, the guy I co-taught the PMC course with, did a presentation on the subject of Marx and class and how Marx uses different definitions of class. Studebaker says, yes, that's because Marx is aware that, and basically I'll just short circuit the whole thing here by saying that Studebaker seems to be aware that Marx is aware of this distinction, meaning that the way that Marx is going to use the term class kind of depends on the objective of the thing that he is doing at the time. And so that's why it changes in different situations. And yeah, he never wrote a whole treatise or any treatise on the topic of class, right? He says that history is the history of class war, working class unite, right? But outside of that, it's just like Marxism it's the working class versus the bourgeoisie. Oh, but what about the old wealth aristocracy? And what about the petty bourgeois? And what about the new PMC? And what about the lumpen proletariat? Well, you know what? At the end of the day, it's 99% versus the 1%. Well, the person who's saying that definitely wants you to think that. But the person who definitely wants you to think that almost guaranteed either belongs to the PMC or wants to. And if we go back to Occupy, which was the 99%, well, yes, that's exactly what was going on. So there you go. That's why this stuff matters.
Coding individuals. This is still part of the preliminary stage of my argument. Having analyzed the relationship between sociological classification and zoological classification and the problem of the insult, I would like to raise another issue, to introduce a third and last case which will present us with another set of problems that I believe are implicated when we speak of classes, whether social class, the gender divide, or age groups. I wish to present an extremely simple problem. It is faced by any sociologist who uses systems of coding. Coding is a typical classification procedure because it entails allocating individuals to classes and assigning properties to them. We take an individual who is a composite reality. Each and every one of you is an individual who has a name, a title, and other distinctive personal attributes. But coding that individual then implies decomposing and atomizing them, analyzing them out into a series of independent autonomous properties capable of being translated into singular categories. For a very ordinary inquiry, like the study of teachers that I am working on at the moment, the process of coding draws on the fact that the individuals who have been interviewed have revealed a certain number of properties. They have stated their age, gender, profession, their parents' professions, their educational qualifications, and the institution where they studied, and in some cases, their political opinions. What are the criteria that I should establish in order to allocate this population to categories that correspond to its own internal articulations? This is the problem facing the code maker. You cannot just slap down formal divisions and divide up things that shouldn't be separated. You shouldn't divide them into classes that are really separate in the real world. We can only code a reality if we know it already, which raises the question of the hermeneutic circle, a problem as old as the human sciences, but with each new generation of ignorant beginners rediscovers as if it were a profound mystery that threatened the progress of the social sciences. I have to say that it is in fact a problem that is very easy to resolve, which doesn't mean that it isn't a very serious problem, as long as we treat it in the way that I propose to deal with it. What, therefore, are the criteria of classification that we should choose? Age, gender, and so forth? Any serious scholar who has worked on a number of investigations will have a repertoire of codes and be tempted to use age, gender, and the like on each and every occasion. There is a repetitive side to research, which tempts us not to question everything that we should question. I said this last week, but I say it again, although I know that it is likely to annoy those of you who are hearing it for the second time. But I accept this, because I believe that I am right to repeat it. contrary to received wisdom. I think that this reflexive turn of the gaze to look back into our own scientific practice is neither a display of spiritualist virtue by the scientist indulging in epistemological fancies in order to salvage his soul as he reaches the end of his career, nor a waste of time. He goes hard, dude. Intelligence and scholarship, at least in the social sciences. I can't speak for other disciplines, but it seems to me to be crucial in the social sciences. In any case, it is my experience that all important scientific progress arises from reflections apparently unrelated to what seems to be the most urgent, immediate priority, which is how to code in the most economical manner. Should the code cover fewer than 15,000 people, 15,000 to 17,000, 15,000 to 30,000, or 30,000 to 40,000? Is it representative of the whole population? Does my graph include ellipses and so on?
And of course, as I touched on last time, sociology has only gone downhill from here. Like this was peak. And so what he's getting at is like, yeah, everybody's like locked into whenever they want to talk about anything, they just rotate through the same sort of registers. Oh yeah, so we'll use the age category, we'll use the gender category, we'll use let's use race, and of course, let's just use the second election of Donald Trump as a perfect example. Everybody's like, oh, we got to think about this through race. Oh, we got to think about this through gender. Oh, we got to think about this through et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then what he's pointing to is that for any seriously rigor thinkers, this is a problem. And if your analysis is supposed to speak on behalf of the whole population or the majority of the population, well, then it's a much bigger problem than if your description is only counting for 15,000 people, right? Mm-hmm. And if this isn't something that you've felt tied up in knots about, well, then congratulations. You are, like most American sociologists, an idiot. But the fact is we have to tie ourselves up in knots over this if we want any kind of claim to legitimation when it comes to speaking on the social as intellectuals, whether that be as autodidacts or pseudo professionals, whichever it might be. Defining reality. My own experience leads me to believe that such reflections have undeniable scientific fertility. They are not merely philosophical musings in the pejorative sense of the term. The problem is how to discover which criteria are pertinent. I shall return to this term. Which criteria will divide up reality according to the divisions that are penciled in, so to speak, in the real world. We need to find criteria that really distinguish groups in the real world, rather than formal criteria devised to suit the needs of the cause. And of course, in light of what he said about the two-class theory, this is, of course, to say that we need to find criteria that really distinguish groups in the real world rather than formal criteria devised to suit the needs for a cause that is defined by a two-class theory, right? But do the criteria we can draw on all have the same status in social reality? Do they all have an equal operational impact? In my choice of criteria, should I rate, say, agrès de l'université on the same level as only son? Will these criteria have the same social import and the same predictive power? One of the major problems for the sociologists is how to maximize the return on their questionnaire. Anyone who devises a questionnaire knows that the main rule, which I must insist on, in case anyone here does not know how important it is is to obtain the maximum the maximum amount of information that we consider pertinent to our quest while using the minimum number of questions. We mustn't waste questions. We need a strategy. And if we don't have both an explicit principle of maximizing the return on the questions and also clear strategic principles directing an inquiry designed to obtain the most information with as few questions as possible, there is a risk of creating hopeless questionnaires that will not even be usable for other inquiries. To maximize the benefit of the inquiry, we must therefore consider the power of the indicators we use. And I want to bring that back to alien anthropology and just say, for all of you aspiring alien anthropologists at TU, this is the problem. And this is why anybody who wants to be a part of that research effort has to consider classification struggles here as an essential reading, right? This insofar as I've indicated that one can get themselves tied up into knots thinking about these problems. I'm also saying that if you want to do alien anthropology, then you probably need to get tied up into knots over these questions. Basically, don't waste your time going and talking to the people if you haven't put in some serious thought into the kinds of questions that you're asking, right? The beginning of part B, or the B side for the last episode, was basically me being like, do you all remember good versus bad questions, according to Bourdieu? And then I use and then I use that to build. How would you say it? What do I do there, Nance? I build on that. Example for like the next hour probably. And I do so using a hypothetical about a research thing that we do in 2026.
Yeah. And kind of like not building a method, but discussing a method and like the motivations behind the method and like, again, taking it back to the what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How can we achieve what we think we want to achieve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And basically, if we were to talk to every anthropologist or every sociologist or every philosopher of science in the world, or most of them, if we had an opportunity to talk to most of them, and then we wanted the data that we get from those conversations to be something that would be useful for researchers, they'd be able to call it empirical. Well, then it requires a good research instrument, which is just a questionnaire, right? And so making that research instrument rigorous is what we're talking about here. What does the power of the indicators mean? If you turn your minds to what I said just now about the insult and official degrading, you might see a link with the social power of indicators. To take one example, there is a difference between the number of years spent in study and the certificates awarded. I realize that you may not grasp the difference straight away because it only occurred to me when I reflected along the lines that I have just suggested to you, although I had used both of these indicators for some time without questioning them. The number of years spent studying is a very good indicator when you want to measure certain types of things, such as the degree of exposure, in the sense of a photosensitive plate, to education. The diploma is something quite different. It measures a social award. Imagine two equally cultivated people, one absolutely self-taught with no academic qualifications, certificates, or credentials, and another who has acquired the same amount of cultural knowledge but in a form measurable by theses and educational qualifications. When it comes to the social uses of these equivalent cultures, there will be enormous differences. In the one case, the simple mention of the title will give access to posts, which, by the way, doesn't mean blog posts, of course, but means like actual positions within institutions. Yeah. In the one case, the simple mention of the title will give access to posts with their salaries, privileges, perks, and other advantages, and this will apply even if the candidate's culture has withered away, which does happen. In the other case, the candidate will be required to give evidence of their culture to display it. As with the insult, the candidate will be out on a limb, will be an idios. But when I choose my criteria, am I not obliged to rely on pre-existing social classifications and the most powerful among them? What I long used to call a good questionnaire, that is, a questionnaire that gathers the greatest amount of pertinent information with the least possible number of questions and the least possible ambiguity and loss, would surely have to be a questionnaire capturing information that preserved all the strongest social classifications, among which, in a society like our own, academic classifications have a very special place. This is not a problem in itself, but I think that we should be aware of it. To continue with the corpus of teachers, I might choose as one of my indicators the title of aggregate, for example. And, if anybody knows about this word and all of its sort of associations, connotations, whatever, in French, do share, but for the time being, I'll keep reading. For example, I mentioned this last time. It is a socially established qualification. The procedure of certification provides the aggregate with a largely guaranteed property. The whole social world conspires to invest in this title and the guarantee that it provides. I shall return to this point later. Moreover, the whole set of individuals thus designated and constituted as aggregates, that is, set apart from the herd, the operation of classification is expressed in the word itself. I mean, I would say like doctoral students or
fellows,
doctors. Yeah. So just substitute any word that obviously separates the people from the herd. So he says, moreover, the whole set of individuals thus designated and constituted, set apart from the herd and consecrated, another term I shall return to, by the type of magical social act that is implied in any act of division, will feel themselves bonded with all the other individuals in this class. There is a Société des Aggregés, that is, a group with a spokesperson who can speak in the name of the group, which means that the members of the group thus constituted can consider it in their interest to belong to the group. This is one criterion to bear in mind. And at risk of derailing us, I'll just say like a great example would be like being the president of the NAACP versus being a black person in America who's got an opinion. And the point is that after civil rights, after there's after the group that was established in the early 1920s has risen to a certain level of cultural recognition, meaning that the Democratic Party actually seeks out, the endorsements of this organization, and meaning that people go to the university with their eyes on a position only possible within that organization. At that point, it's a new thing, right? It's no longer enough to be the smartest and the most popular or the best at organizing, right? It doesn't matter if you're like an IRL Fred Hampton or something like this. It doesn't matter, right?
I think Al Sharpton is a good example of that, because Al Sharpton is a guy that I think does a lot of harm, but he's got tremendous prestige and tremendous social recognition because he came up in like the Black Methodist milieu, and that was something that was constructed. And we could problematize, the currents and conditions that necessitated the construction of the kind of like the black church in America. And that's true. It was a refuge for a lot of people. It provided help. Look, I'm not trying to diminish anything, but it is also it's also a contrived thing. And Al Sharpton benefits greatly from the fact that people look
Right.
to him for political endorsement. People look to him for his opinion rather than their fucking coworker or their neighbor or their
Yeah.
fucking friend.
Right.
They're like, in fact, people will claim your neighbor is a fucking fascist if he disagrees with Al Sharpton. And it's like, what do you mean? He's a dude living through it. He's going through the shit that he's going through, and he thinks this would actually benefit him. But because he disagrees with polite society, he's a bad guy. He's a deplorable. Put him in a bucket of deplorables and flush him down the toilet.
Right. And like I said, it would open up a whole thing. But no,
yeah.
Al Sharpton or Jim Clyburn, right?
Mhm.
Who, if anybody remembers, the loss of the 2019 Bernie campaign was at the time of Super Tuesday. Lots of articles attributed that to not getting Jim Clyburn's endorsement. They're basically like, Bernie didn't call up Jim. That's what happened. And it's like, actually, Jim Clyburn has been deep in the oligarch sauce and sources of funding and the Democratic mainstream for a long time. That would have never been possible. And if we really cared about such things, then the endorsements that Bernie already had would have been sufficient. But of course, they don't care. But yeah, you can always find a Thomas Sowell or a Clarence Thomas to say the opposite day thing to whatever the Democratic mainstream of the moment is saying. But the main point, and the reason I brought it up, is because it brings us back to the Vampire Castle essay by Mark Fisher, which is, and I'm just going to go off of memory here, but it's that moment, like he basically says that like the Vampire Castle gets started at the point that a movement to remove the meaning attributed to an identity category gets inverted because they've achieved some degree of social recognition. So now there's people whose entire life is spent in reference to the symbolic capital that comes from strengthening that social category. And I would then just go ahead and say, yeah, we like to pick on L or Jim, but this goes just as much for Cornel West. And so, just putting that out there for anybody who look. And I've met him now. I genuinely will say this. Cornel West is like a force of nature, except that it's more like, no, spirit. He's a force of spirit. Like there's actually something about his charisma and persona that outside of the like song and dance he does between Christianity and the left, outside of the song and dance he does for Christianity and the left, there's something at the level of his humanity that can only be experienced in actually meeting him. And it's something that is powerful. And so I don't want to denigrate him, but I am going to just say he is still participating in this thing, right? So, yeah. But also we wouldn't know who he is if he didn't participate in it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that selling out in like the punk scene or like the pop culture scene or the youth scene or whatever, that is predicated on that operation where it goes like, oh, the thing that was formerly the outsider status or the formerly the undesirable that's now been made cool or desirable. Like the idea of selling out, the notion of selling out is like this disavowal of the fact that no, your movement already gave up the ghost. Like your movement already jumped the shark. If you're at this point where you're having this question of like, is he authentically punk?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And that's not a good thing.
Yeah. And then you get the same thing with like, well, is this person really the president of this chapter of the NAACP? Well, what if she's not actually black? Right? Like these questions, which means that everybody needs to go read Nance's piece on Rachel Dolezal. But the point is like these questions of authentic claim to a category have to be read within the kind of context we're giving it here, this sort of meta conversation about classification and how the kinds of criteria that people use for classification are almost always in service to a cause, and it's a cause that pre-exists the researchers in question. Another example, gender as an almost inevitable criterion. Is the status of this indicator the same since the emergence of the feminist movement? I leave you to think about that. Might the emergence of a feminist movement have brought the masculine-feminine indicator closer to the aggregate indicator? Another example, the age group. Here the professional classifiers are happy because there is no apparent problem, but it is normally a purely arbitrary class based on a purely formal criterion. There are no groups like those formed by the aggregates or normalians behind the criterion. In certain periods, debates opposing youth to maturity do of course arise, constructed in general by adults who want to use them as a means of manipulation. We think of youth movements in the pre-Hitler era, for example. But it is obvious that this criterion does not have the same predictive constitutive status as the others. I could continue with religion, a criterion on which I would easily talk for 2 hours, but I fear that I would bore you and repeat things that I have already dealt with. A criterion like religion is very difficult to handle because it can function either as a badge of honor or as a stigma. The logic of the stigma and the logic of abuse, you're nothing but a ... are obviously very similar, and the stigmatized groups are often used as scapegoats for abuse. Another example, geographic origin, which in the United States is pretty much either usually saying South or Appalachian, and outside of that, very rarely comes up. Maybe sometimes you'll hear Midwestern, but for the most part in the United States, there's a lot of geographic regions that have their own sort of reliable cultural differences, but it's that doesn't make it into the discourse, and those are not categories by which people tend to think about things. As with gender, a few years ago, regionist movements were not understood were not understood in such a way as to make you think of a region south of the Loire as being as Akatesia. I could continue. I have no idea what I just read. It doesn't matter. I could continue. This example is becoming long-winded, but I am thinking of those among you who are professional practitioners of sociology and who know what I am talking about but are tempted to forget it. In any case, the fact that I myself have often forgotten to take the advice I have just given you makes me feel authorized to all of this.
Fuck yeah. And that the lore and the Occitania, like that's just, I think, a similar construction to the South or the Appalachia here in the U.S. It becomes a political instrument. The example of the socio-occupational categories. I shall take one last example from these problems of classification, that of the socio-occupational category. A time-honored debate divides the world of sociologists, or more precisely, those who are professional enough to consider classification as problematic. Unfortunately, this is not the whole of the class. Some say that they are partisans of social classification in the Marxist sense. Others prefer the CSP, socio-occupational category. That is the cold, complex, bureaucratic system used by INSEE, middle management, office employment, service sector, retail business, etc. It is an academic debate, and I am ready to bet that 50% of the pedagogic energy spent on teaching sociology in France is devoted to this distinction. So, you will allow me to spend 5 minutes on the subject. Laughter. Here
Everybody
too.
split their
Everybody
guts.
laugh. Yeah.
Everybody laughed so hard when he said that. No, I think that's funny because it's like there's something so Parisian, which is to say internet, about this whole seminar, because he's constantly aware that there are people who are like, I'm too big brained for the fact that you just repeated yourself. Mm-hmm. And then there's also people who are like, oh my God, I feel so left behind. And so he's constantly making that explicit. And this is a good example of it because he's like, yeah, I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking about a thing. And then why does he have to point out? Well, because it's so pedestrian that you talk about something that's so normal. And it's like, yeah, but that's why I should
Yeah.
talk about it for 5 minutes.
Yeah, so we don't do the thing and be like, oh, yeah, we're all the smart people here. We all know what we're talking about. We don't have to take this seriously. We can half-ass it, but we still have this symbolic, like, sign-off that we did our jobs well and we took it seriously. Here, too, there are entire bibliographies on this CSP versus social class debate, seemingly so important. Everything that I shall argue throughout this lecture series will be an attempt to undermine this opposition and to question it, as I have done for the other categories: age, gender, aggregate, etc. We need first to ask what kind of groups are produced by these classifications. Do they correspond to real groups, to something like the Société des Agrégés, for example? And then, do the classes produced by these two principles of classification, class and CSP, match the reality we see in groups displaying the signs by which we recognize a group, such as the existence of a more or less stable administrative structure, an official delegate, plenipotentiary or spokesperson mandated to speak on behalf of the group, and so on. Secondly, where do these classifications originate? Who devises them? Where do we situate the producers of these classifications in the space of classifiers? Are they considering things in sociological terms? Inquiries into the social classes tend to be more of an academic exercise. Or are they dealing with socio-occupational categories, which is more the province of INSEE and the administration? These two principles of classification correspond to different social aims and functions. The CSP are constructed for the needs of economic administration, that is, to predict as accurately as possible trends in things like patterns of consumption and so on. The social classes have a different social origin and function. They are situated in a different space and yield benefits on another level, that of Marxist debate. In discussing this third case, that of coding, I wanted to say, as I have already shown in the case of the insult, that there are considerable differences depending on the categorums that I use when I categorize, when I classify, when I devise an ordinary code for an everyday inquiry. Categorums are enabling powers. They are credentials, as the English say. They are titles which function as bonds. A diploma is a certificate of credit. They are shares or investments in society. To have an academic title means that, in a wide range of circumstances, which we should define, they are officially guaranteed by the state. They allow their holders to make a legitimate claim to the advantages associated with these titles: academic position, high rank, property ownership. Among the properties that I shall select in order to characterize these individuals, some are powers. Think of the English word knowledge. It can imply power in the sense of knowledge is power, or an acknowledged representative empowered to act. I think that, for a sociology of power, to use the word power in this sense is important. Who guarantees these powers? The question is important. We return to the problem that I raised in the case of abuse, where the insulter is their own sole guarantor, but the degrader is sponsored by the whole social order. The holder of a universally accredited academic title is guaranteed by the whole social order. The holder of an in-house qualification issued by an employer, such as the privately qualified engineer, has a certificate of passage of only local validity. The self-taught person who has followed an open access correspondence course has no guarantee at all. There is then a continuum among the socially guaranteed properties, from those that are universally guaranteed to those that have almost no guarantee, are accredited only in small circles, and whose only function is to impress friends and family. That is one factor. Then, alongside these socially guaranteed criteria, which, from the sociologist's point of view, are the most effective for understanding and classifying the real world and its articulations, there are others produced by scholars, whose knowledge of reality makes them introduce them because they believe that, although they are not officially certified, they are efficient.
Good job, Pierre. Ow, ow. I like how your soundboard version of clapping is a lot more like what sounds like hecklers.
Yeah, like, yeah, fuck you, dude.
Like mine is like there's actually like the ambiance of like a big auditorium kind of rustling around in the background. Like I actually cut out a lot of the noise and just focus on the clapping in my soundbite. But it's like, no, I took it from like this real clapping and yours is like 10 people being very loud, which is way more accurate.
But those are 10 dope ass motherfuckers. We don't need full amphitheaters. Not yet, anyway. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Nah, dude. No, we'll never get there. Because by the time we get there, the we is crossed out, right? So it's like, it's that selling out thing. Yeah. Our goal is to sell out as fast as possible. But once we're actually there, we turn around and say, everyone, we told you so. We've been telling you all.
The whole time, dude.
We really just came at this moment in history when white people needed to hear it's okay to sell out. Yeah. Because black people already knew it, right? That's the difference between hip hop and punk, according to Mikey.
Yeah.
I'm joking. But anyway, so what do we want to say in close here? I wanted to say it for side A, except that there may be a side B, but that's to be determined. And there will be some discussion on the other side of the public stream, but whether that constitutes an actual other side of the episode or not is something that will be determined, because I am feeling several things that we could get into right now. But one of them is just the fact that I am coming out of some kind of a stomach bug, and I was like out of it for 48 hours and all this crap. And the other thing is I want to check in on my wife and see what she's doing and what the plan is for the rest of the day, and try to get on the same page with her really quickly. And also just, variable length sessions is something that we take from Lacan here. So whether we actually do a whole other side, well, we'll see. But we're definitely going to go check in with folks like Brian and David and Mike and Will, who are currently participants over here on the Zoom side. But I kind of want to bring it back around to all of this between linguistics and sociology, which is where most French theory takes place, right? When we think of that, except much, much stronger and bigger brained than what you would have gotten in any other theorist besides Bourdieu in the previous, say decade. Because he's on their shoulders, and he's doing this thing between and beyond Marx and Heidegger, right? And what he just closed it out on here is so relevant to at least me and Nance. And I'll just say it this way. On the one side, it's Marxist debate, right? So like this is all sort of in the context of Marxist debate. He is explicit about this. And of course, he brings it back to that on page 28. But on the other side, we do want to impress our friends and family. And the fact is the longer you spend trying to win or at least impress people within Marxist debates, the quicker you lose the ability to impress your friends and family.
This is true, dude.
And the more time you spend trying to impress your friends and family with your time spent studying post-Marxism, the higher the odds are people within Marxist debates will not take you seriously. Bourdieu is getting at why that is. Basically, we have a split big other, right? On the one side, we're local. On the other side, we want to be universal, right? And classification is something we have to think about rigorously if we are to do that thing, if we are to walk and chew bubblegum, as Nance says. Stevie J says, I'm a few minutes behind, but to put that lecture segment in meme format, the credentialism fan versus the knowledge enjoyer.
Yeah, and I think we have to be honest and be both. Porque no los dos? We have to be both. We look, to be quite honest, there is still something in me that responds to the credentialism. There is still something in me that like gets me going or turns me on or whatever when I see, a dozen letters after someone's name, and I see, oh, they studied at Cambridge and Oxford and Brown and Rutledge or like there is. Let's not do the whole we're cool, awesome punk rockers and we don't need that shit. Like we do want that type of recognition. But we also still are knowledge enjoyers as well. And I think I don't know. I keep coming back to like intention. And like the so what of it all. And yeah, I think the so what of it all is like I believe in the Emerald City on the Hill, and I believe it's like up to somebody to take action to make that a possibility, and we find ourselves here. So if I want to really believe that without this painful cognitive dissonance, I have to act. But I also get a kick out of it. I have fun. It is fun to be the knower of things, the understander of things. It is fun to do the deconstruction, and it is fun to be able to have like rich conversation with people. And it's not all just for this instrumental thing. Like it is very instrumental. It is very like there is a directionality in all this stuff, but there's also like this resolute core of non-instrumental doing it for the fucking sake of doing it. And it is both. It is necessarily both. And maybe because it is necessarily both, it becomes something else, or maybe not. I don't know. But I think that's a good meme there, Stevie. And I think we are both. Rudy says we are necessarily both. Neither credentialism nor knowledge seeking can be reduced into a clear-cut hierarchy. Correct. Porque no los dos?
Well, I mean, the clearest cut hierarchy would be we don't give a fuck about credentialism. Yeah. We are here to do the knowledge-seeking thing. And then I say that as a fallen professional. Benjamin Studebaker says that as an established professional. And Nance says that as someone who's purely an autodidact. And then we all shake each other's hands and say yes to the things themselves. And then we are all like, yes, the virtuous quest for truth and love and beauty and goodness, we're on it. And this has nothing to do with symbolic capital at all, guys. And then, of course, that would be stupid. That would be stupid, yep. Of course. And then on the other side, there's this, it's all credentialism. But you're going to be hard-pressed to find a sphere of knowledge where it's all about credentialism. There has to be at least some pretense between the researchers that they would take somebody seriously who's an autodidact if that autodidact could really like prove themselves, right? Like there's always that myth and like that idea that somebody could intervene in their discourse, of course, assuming that the person has access or could find access to their discourse, but like there's some kind of a goodwill hunting mythos in every lover of knowledge's mind, right?
Applesauce, bitch.
But the issue is that it's one thing to say it's both and it's another thing to say what's going on here with Bourdieu's entire project, which is not to say that it's an either or that it's a both and. He is not interested in credentialism so much as pointing out for elite Parisian sociologists and the general public who is in the room with them. Is the general public in the room with you right now? It was at the College of France for him. Yeah. The point is to get those sociologists to realize that the classification strategies that they are employing are strategies, and that they are downstream from disputes, and that this is never some neutral thing, and that you can't just willy-nilly cycle through the different lenses in your sociological imagination to analyze something and then be like, see, I did a thing. I did a sociology. And so like the cheap example of that would be, so you watched Wicked and now you're going to go, okay, let's think about it as a statement on feminism or as a product of feminism. No. Let's think about it as a statement on race or as a product of the discourse on race. No. Let's think about it in class terms. No, let's think about it in age terms. No, let's think about it in da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The point is you are employing classification strategies that were developed before you were born, that had a certain meaning at a certain time in history and have taken on a new meaning at a different point in history, and there were potentially other variations in its meaning along the way, and that these meanings are not just up to you and your individuality or your personal intention. And so your personal desire to seek truth and your personal appreciation for truth on its own, that is not enough. That is not enough, because your intention, yeah, it matters, but also there are objective factors in play. And so, for instance, I would say between the two of us, we both share this fantasy construct of the rigorous Renaissance man. Obviously, we do. Oh, the rigorous truth seeker who's willing to like work through difficult conversations and contradictions and blah, blah, blah. Aren't we all? But that acknowledgement that it's a fantasy construct is not enough. The point is to bring it back to the relations of production and to show how those relations of production are atop the mode of production, and to show the ways in which these discourses reify the mode of production, which is to also say, keep it going.
Yeah, man.
It's a great way of disavowing the hermeneutics of credentials, says Rudy. Out there might be ... No, I should have read the other parts. He said, we are necessarily both, right? Neither credentialism nor knowledge. You already read that. In the sense that one stays indebted to the other. And so like the credentialism and the knowledge seeking both rely on each other. Absolutely. Now, of course, we could think of like people who are truly autodidacts. And we could think of someone who's purely there for the credentialism, right? Mm-hmm. We can think of these examples. In reality, what you have are a lot of people trying to find their calling, trying to find a passion, trying to pursue something for its own sake. And they have to do that between the algorithm and the academy. Trying to do that between those two things is the problem. And that's what my piece on Substack today is ultimately about when I'm talking about are autodidacts just pseudo-professionals. And that's where I get into the distinction between rump professionals, fallen professionals, and autodidacts. or we could say, to be controversial, pseudo-professionals. And the point is, for me, no, they are not the same thing. An autodidact is different from a pseudo-professional. But of course, the two overlap a lot. And if you want to stop just performing sort of like this pseudo-professionalism, if you want to stop being a poser and be the real autodidact, some degree of this reflexive deconstruction is necessary to work through your motivations socioanalytically. And with that, we're going to close this thing out, everybody. Thank you, Nance.
Yeah, man.
Thanks, everybody else. And we'll hang out with you all on the Zoom side in a minute,
Bye, YouTube.
right after this. Peace.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey seminar are paying for. Pausing. Hello, everybody. If you're still listening at this point, then you must have been enjoying the PSA. And if you were not enjoying it, then you were probably sitting there wondering, what am I going to watch next? Or you had your hands all covered in water and soap, in which case you were sort of stuck listening to what's currently playing, which is the PSA at the end of episode 2 of the Self-Legitimating Johnsons here at Theory Underground. But I pause it simply to say the website is going to be intermittently down for the next week as the new framework is put in place. And so becoming a TU membership person is difficult. And it's difficult because if you try to go to the link where you could do such things, there's nothing there. But if you're lucky, maybe there will be something there, in which case go ahead and become a TU member. And if you do so now, as opposed to in a month or two, you'll get grandfathered in on all kinds of cool stuff that would otherwise be expensive. And so kind of take everything in this PSA with a grain of salt, because it was devised at this point 6 months ago. And so a lot has changed since then. And a tendency for a certain kind of overly analytic thinker is to take the fine print at TU too seriously, when in reality it's the spirit of things that matters. And if you're the kind of person who sits there and like reads, well, what's under tier 2, this, that, and the other thing? Oh, what's under tier 3, this, that, and the other thing? And then you sit there and you go, oh, well, just know the joke's on us. We never remember what the fine print says. And so we'll only exist until someone sues us out of existence for not keeping up with the promises made in that fine print. But also at the same time, look, we're just doing all kinds of stuff and we're constantly evolving. And all you need to know is that the tiers get you more versus less access. And the lowest tiers are basically just being able to be present for things, whereas the higher tiers include increased degrees of participation that include conversation and us actually reading your work via the turn, which is all part of building up Tribunal Zero, which we will talk about more in the future, but has a lot to do with the self-legitimation processes that we are finding ourselves in here and now. Thank you, everybody. Much love, and I will resume it. Peace. There is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Zizek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time, where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button, subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McCarrickers are doing, then the best way is to become a tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, tier 4 is amazing because it gives you tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
And finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff. So big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god, it's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons, thank you. Oh, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons, thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why do we do this? Fuck. You guys, just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You do it. You did so good. Thanks, guys.